In this video, we're going to be giving our attention to the Blood Death Knight, or in other words, the unkillable god. This tank has had its fair share of ups and downs over the last few seasons. We're going to be highlighting both the pros and cons for this spec and walk through a lot of the different possible options in the talent tree. Obviously, this is still beta and there are a ton of possibilities for change, so that's something that we need to keep in mind. I do plan on rolling out videos for each and every tank, so if that's something that interests you, feel free to subscribe. It's free after all. With that out of the way, let's break down the talent tree and talk about why Blood Death Knight is still an unstoppable force. As some of you might be aware, I'm a Mythic Plus player at heart, so I'm going to be approaching this at the angle for 5-man content. My overall take for raids is play whatever you want. All tanks can provide useful toolkit buffs or defensives. There are some talents that are more catered to raid, but I'm not going to be going over that in this video. With that out of the way, let's jump into the class tree breakdown. While I don't think that Blood Death Knight has the most appealing start to the talent tree that we've seen, there are a lot of great lateral transitions throughout that really make up for the rough start. Blood Death Knight must start off with just Death Strike, and they have the option to begin progressing through either the Unholy or Frost sides of the talent tree. Now, before we move down the center of the tree, I want to grab a few abilities that I think are going to be vital to the success of any key pusher. To start, we're going to grab Chains of Ice, Mind Freeze, and then Permafrost so we can grab Icebound Fortitude. While Chains of Ice isn't an ability you need to use often, it can come in handy every once in a while. I'm not happy having to put a point here, but having a kick, auto attack absorb, and a pretty major defensive makes this choice worth it. While playing Permafrost can be super nice, it's easy to trade this for Blinding Sleet if you find yourself needing any extra CC. This can be a great option in dungeons like Azure Vault. With 4 points left, we're going to focus going down the center of the tree to amplify our defensive kit. Anti-Magic Shell, Barrier, and Veteran of the Third War should put us in a more stable position when it comes to damage intake. At this point, we're going to find ourselves moving into the second tier of the talent tree, but we are going to work our way back up here to pick up better pathing later. This area of the tree is where we start to see some specific specialization aspects of the tree blend together. There is actually some pretty decent lateral movement coming in from the center of the tree, allowing for frost-based talents to bleed into the unholy side of the tree and vice versa. To put us in a good position to pick up certain capstones, I've been aiming to pick up Wraithwalk. While kind of a joke talent previously, the Blood Death Knight has always struggled with movement, and Wraithwalk definitely helps the class get from point A to point B faster. It also removes roots and prevents slows. In a few dungeons there are actually root effects, so this is going to be a nice little form of utility. I get here by taking Anti-Magic Zone and Asphyxiate. This gives us solid group utility with a single target stun. This actually sets us up for picking up capstones we want later on, and then the rest of our 9 points are going to be used to pick up certain perks and ability bonuses. At this point, I'd like to go back up to the first tier and pick up Improved Death Strike and March of Darkness. March will allow us to sneak into the Unholy side of the tree to target something like Unholy Endurance, Grip of the Dead, Unholy Ground, and Death's Echo. In order to get there, we must play through Suppression and Might of Thessarian. My typical tree looks like this. I've been pretty adamant about staying away from some of the early Unholy talents like Raise Dead and Control Undead and Enfeeble. There could be a time and place to run some of these talents, but for now we're going to try to avoid them. We do have 3 points here to spend though. We can either look to play into extra CC, slows, heals, or just random stats. And that's why I like the tree a little more than the others, because despite having to play more into the first tier, a lot of the choices feel pretty impactful, and there's still a ton of flexibility similar to how we saw in the Warrior. Because of some of the talents that we've played through already, and what we're going to be aiming for later in the spec tree, I'm actually going to be playing into Gloom Ward by playing through Merciless Strikes. Lastly, let's send our last point into Blood Scent. Again, these points are fairly flexible. Need extra cleave damage? Go for Cleaving Strikes. Need CC? Go for Blinding Sleet. Want extra defensive powers? Either play Reduced Cooldown on Icebound or Death Pact. All of these choices can be fine and ultimately come down to preference. For the remainder of this tree, we're going to focus on hitting Death's Echo, Abomination Limb, and Empower Rune Weapon. The only capstone you truly need is going to be Abomination Limb. Death's Echo can be a preference. I personally like the uptime on Death and Decay in concordance with Unholy Ground and another Spec tree talent option called Shattering Bone. So let's play 2 points into Blood Draw and 2 points into Will of the Necropolis. These both provide us extremely useful pseudo-cheat deaths that are dependent on your current health. Next, we're going to go 2 points into Rune Mastery and 2 points into Icy Talons, and then these are going to give us our final capstones. Like I said before, Death's Echo is somewhat optional. You can also not play Empowered Rune Weapon, which will free up 2 points for you to either pick up additional CC or cleave, like I mentioned before. I like the class tree a lot because there is a good bit of variance depending on your group and the dungeon you're running. Regardless of what you choose, the Death Knight feels incredibly strong, having access to things like Abomination Limb, Empowered Rune Weapon, and a bunch of sweet little passives. With the Spec tree coming into play, this may give you a little perspective into why the class tree feels so great and what synergies lie between them. While I do like the direction they went with the Blood Death Knight, the tree doesn't excite me as much as like the Protection Warrior or the Paladin, but Let's take a look. Similar to the other tanks, we must play into a few specific talents regardless, which kind of take away the magic of choice. We must take Heartstrike, Blood Boil, Crimson Scourge, Mirror Rent, and Vamp Blood. While all stable abilities for the Death Knight, we are already down 5 points with absolutely no choice. From this point, we can either lean a little left or a little right. The talents that I've been playing will include Ossuary and Improved Heartstrike. Even though we have unlocked the second tier, without playing Death's Caress, we won't have access to certain far right talents in the second tier. Alongside that, Death's Caress is also extremely powerful now after seeing a slight rework. The strength of the Death Knight revolves around the very center of the tree, hence why we're going to either take Improved Heartstrike or Improved Vampiric Blood. Our goal for this tree is to be able to at least hit Shattering Bone and ideally Umbilicus Eternus. After placing our 9th point into Death's Caress, we can now move into the second tier of the tree. For Mythic Plus specifically, it's almost non-negotiable to play Dancing Rune Weapon alongside of Amplified Nodes. I'm actually really happy to see the return of the Insatiable Blade Power, which is giving us cooldown reduction on Dancing Rune Weapon, alongside the Everlasting Bond trait, which is giving us a copy of our Rune Weapon and doubling its duration. After picking up these, we're now left with 8 points to traverse the rest of the tree, which can be quite difficult. There are a few talents I believe to be incredibly useful or allow us for solid pathing throughout the rest of the tree, especially approaching Tier 3. Let me quickly go through my exact Tier 2 build and then talk about some options and the reasoning you may or may not take certain talents. Early on in the season, especially before you're all geared out, there are certain levels of haste that we're going to want to hit. For the Blood Death Knight, we're already getting a fair bit of haste while remaining in our Death and Decay, and on top of that, we're going to want to aim for Improved Bone Shield, which is giving us 10% haste while our Bone Shield is actually active. Because of this, you either have to play through Foul Bulwark or Heartbreaker. Personally, I've been playing Heartbreaker, which will have a little bit of synergy later on. We also want to grab Rune Tap for a mini defensive to start off some of these pulls, and then I'm going to take Leech Strike and Blood Tap. With 2 points remaining, we're going to actually work the right side of the tree a little bit until the third tier opens up. We find ourselves grabbing Relish and Blood to slightly increase our running power generation and to save a point instead of playing through a 2-point node. Then we're going to send our last point into Rapid Decomposition. The idea of this side of the tree is to really bolster our damage modifiers on our Blood Plague for our objective capstone Umbilicus Eternus. With the final tier unlocked, we are now going to actually pick up Tombstone and Shattering Bone times 2. This is going to end up being a large portion of our AoE damage and will allow us to have a controllable cooldown reduction and a burst in concordance with our Insatiable Blade. With just 7 points left, we're going to actually make an attempt to dash for the far right capstone of Umbilicus Eternus. This means that we're going to be playing the following. Oh man. Coagulopathy, Sanguine Ground, Red Thirst, and finally Umbilicus Eternus. I definitely had to look up how to pronounce that word. Then the last 2 points we can sink into Heartrend, followed by Purgatory. This will typically only be done in extremely high keys. Now, before I get all the comments about how this build is whack, let me walk through the pros and cons as well as some adaptations. If you ever feel like you don't need Purgatory, you can actually drop these 2 talents here and utilize things like Gore Fiends and Tightening Grasp. I find that Ironheart and Bloodshot can be a little odd in Mythic Plus, so I don't recommend playing into them. There are certain pulls where Blood Shield will actually get eaten up super quickly, or even the argument that a lot of your damage in AoE scenarios is actually going to be shadow damage and not physical. Bloodshot is really only for single target damage, therefore it's not super worth in Mythic Plus in the most general sense. Ideally in the future, we can drop Improved Bone Shield once we find ourselves at a higher item level. Once this happens, it will actually open up another point to eventually play maybe Gorefiend's Grasp. There are also a lot of people saying that Blood should just play without Gorefiends entirely now that we take Abomination Limb, but like, come on, I don't feel like a Blood Death Knight without Gorefiends. Originally, I was trying to play either Homeostasis or Voracious, but I found that Death Strike is just already overhealing a ton, and even when needing to heal over 90,000 HPS. The idea for this build is focus on maintaining Icy Talons and Coagulopathy. How the fuck do you say this again? And Coagulopathy? Coagulopathy? We're gonna just call it CP. I think CP buff. And then sending your Vampiric Embrace on cooldown. This will make your Blood Plague hit really hard, heal you, and build up massive absorb shields, which, with proper runic power spending, can actually happen like every 40 to 50 seconds. While outside of the Vampiric window, the focus is rotating CDs while maintaining said buffs, so you can execute another massive Umbilicus window again in the near future. It's a really cool playstyle, but can be very punishing if you end up falling behind. Anyways, I've had actually relative success on beta with this build specifically. Besides a lackluster damage profile, this class feels really good to play, and I'm glad to see it returning to its roots. But let me know what you guys think down below. Is there something that I missed for talent options? Are you going to miss having Mass Grip? I know I am. Anyways, huge shout out to all my patrons who give their actual real life dollars and dimes to allow me to make, well, whatever you want to call this. Hopefully you're all staying happy, healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.